this description of Christian nationalism as a sort of right-wing danger to the fabric of America, in the way that a lot of right-wingers will see left-wing radical wokeists as a danger to the fabric of America. And so the focus is, I suppose, maybe more on the nationalism part than the Christian part. But there's also just this historical question, which is the one that I'm more interested in, which is less about, let's say, the danger of people who today believe in the existence of God and the risks that they might pose to American democracy, whatever that might mean, but whether the country that you're in is best described in a historical sense as a Christian nation. And I've heard you say before that it is. And I've heard you use phrases like the soul of America is Christian and saying things like this. And I suppose the first thing I wanted to clarify is, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if you do say that America is a Christian nation, or perhaps ought to be a Christian nation, are you talking here legally, like in terms of the documents, the Constitution, or are you just talking about say the culture or something like that, or the philosophy undergirding the legal element of this conversation?
I don't always neatly separate these two things. I know that some American libertarians are fond of saying that, politics is totally distinct from culture or something like that. I think that's all a little bit silly. I think what we're talking about here when we talk about the soul of a country is a nation's constitution, capital C, and a nation's constitution, lowercase c, and that laws and customs and taboos and ends and goals are not so neatly separable. So another problem, I suppose, with Americans being a little dismissive of history is that we pick arbitrary dates to start looking at our own history. So typically, Americans look at 1776, or else, a little over a decade later at the Constitutional Convention, and they will say, this is the beginning of America. But it does cause one to ask, well, hold on, where did those people come from? How did they get there? And so America begins a little earlier than that. I would trace it to 1620, to the Mayflower. One could, I suppose, trace it in different parts even earlier than that. But in any case, wherever you trace it to, the men who came there broadly were Christian. They certainly came from a Christian culture. And
so he's instantly doing the thing. I don't care if they were all Christian. Their version of Christian was different. This is the same thing that they try to say where they're like, well, the people that founded America were white, They weren't really. They were Anglo-Saxon. The type of Christian that they're talking about is going to be a different type of Christianity than what we probably follow today, or what Knowles would follow today, what is common today. Like, the majority of people at first in America were also men. America is not founded to be a man nation. Although it's kind of treated like that sometimes.
Where Americans have long found their origin is in the Mayflower, among men who were extraordinarily zealous separatist Christians. In fact, I'm not an academic historian or even a trained apologist or theologian. I am a cigar salesman, and I've named my cigar company Mayflower after those very men. Some of my ancestors were on that boat, and they made it quite clear that they were in the United States on a religious project, the country that would become the United States, on a religious project. And then the Puritans who followed the Pilgrims had slight distinctions from them theologically, but were broadly the same. And so Governor John Winthrop of the Massachusetts...
Yeah, but why did they really go there, right? They wanted to establish their own church, sure, but they also wanted freedom from the government having the regulations regarding the church. Like, all along, it may have even been a religious quest or some crap, but it was only religious because they wanted their own religious freedom.
Its Bay Colony, he declared that America would be a shining city on a hill in a famous speech called A Model of Christian Charity. And all the way up through the Revolution, Americans considered themselves to be Christian. The Founding Fathers were a little bit of a hodgepodge of Freemasons and deists, but there were a number of vaguely faithful-seeming Christians among them, and even the ones who were not particularly orthodox in their Christianity, at least recognized the importance of Christianity to the country. So you have a Founding Father, author of the Federalist Papers, and the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Jay. He said that Christianity must be the religion of the United States. He thanked God that the country had the same religion, were descended from the same stock. He went so far as to say that non-Christians should never hold public office. Now, there's no religious test for office in the Constitution, but there are religious parameters around the country. So if you go back to the philosophical founding document, the Declaration, it begins and predicates the nation on the notion that all men are created equal and endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. So I'm not trying to convince...
Just if this guy said it, though, like, so what? That's not in the Constitution. That's not in the Declaration of Independence. Even if it said, like, rights endowed by our Creator, that's very vague terminology regarding religious stuff. That could just be any religion, even, that believes in, like, a creator, in a God that creates people or something. That could be any religion.
You hear that this is a papal bull, or this is, some particularly sectarian version of Christianity. But at the very least, the nation, I think we all would have to agree, is predicated on the notion that God exists and created us and gave us rights. And then in practice, America developed far more clearly in a Christian manner, so much so that in our national anthem, in the little heard final verse, the final stanza, Francis Scott Key writes, "Conquer we must when our cause is just, and this be our motto, and God is our trust," and it's inscribed on our money, and it's in our Pledge of Allegiance. So, I think one can quibble over quite how orthodox or rigorous the Christianity of America was, but it's simply an historical fact that it was Christian men who were motivated by Christian ideas, who created Christian institutions, who founded the country, whether it was consciously Christian or not.
And quibble we shall. We'll get back to Michael Knowles in just a moment, but first, I've got an exciting announcement.
No.
I want to invite you, this is because he writes Common Sense, which is during a time when many people in the colonies were really just looking for better representation. The idea of actual revolution and independence was not as inevitable as a lot of people may think. Thomas Paine writes Common Sense and convinces a lot of people that actually maybe independence is the goal here. And I think to this day, Common Sense is still the greatest selling American pamphlet. Now, and it's still in print, of course. He's not just the author of the American Revolution, though, of course. He's also the author of a text known as The Age of Reason, which espouses, sure, a philosophical deism. He says in no uncertain terms right at the beginning that he believes in one God, but also describes organized religions, including Christianity, as essentially conspiracies to conduct power and to hold monopolies over people. And in fact, this leads him into a great deal of controversy. He ends up narrowly escaping execution. He gets exiled. He dies, and then when his bones are dug up to be brought back over to England, they end up getting lost, and we still don't know where his bones are today. And about 6 people attended his funeral. And yet this man is the author of the American Revolution. Now, why is it that at the end of his life he's treated with such disregard and contempt? It might have something to do with the fact that his own personal religious beliefs were, in no uncertain terms, not Christian. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that America is a legally secular nation. It doesn't mean that Thomas Paine is not an anomaly among the founding fathers. But in the way that we can say, okay, the founding document of America, maybe the Declaration of Independence, not a legal document. I mean, the Declaration of Independence is not supposed to be legislation. It doesn't protect any rights. It doesn't establish any courts. It doesn't do anything other than act as a polemic, essentially, against not just monarchy, but the specific king.
Well, just on that point, I mean, I'm
sure.
Quite interested in many of the things you've said, and I'm not surprised that a British atheist would choose a Brit, a very liberal Brit,
mention Thomas Paine
as his favorite founding father. But there was some legal force to the Declaration, which is that the Declaration told King George that they were separating. So I agree with you. It's a different sort of document than the Constitution. Though Abraham Lincoln, later then in the 19th century, elevates, again, the Declaration of Independence to the level of, I think, a more significant founding document. But it does have some legal bearing in as much as it kicked the whole thing off.
Yeah, it's treasonous. I mean, literally treasonous in the sense that if I write a document right now that says something illegal, which can happen in the United Kingdom, this would have sort of legal relevance, let's say. But the Declaration is clearly supposed to be a mixture of it's supposed to draw upon law and history and also rhetoric. It's supposed to uplift and inspire a nation to revolution, which is sort of...
I feel like they would benefit from defining what exactly they mean by like America being a Christian nation, even in the first place, because it sounds like when I hear that, I'm thinking, okay, is it like legally a Christian nation? But it sounds like what Knowles is talking about is culturally, generally speaking, the people were Christian, which, okay, but that's definitely not what I'm thinking of when I hear Christian nation. It might help to define their terms.
What it did and what it does. But when you get to the actual legal document, it takes a little bit more time and a few more people to throw together. Interestingly, by the way, one of Thomas Jefferson's earliest drafts of the Declaration of Independence doesn't mention a creator. It does say that that men and women are endowed by that they are created equal, but it doesn't say that they're endowed by a creator. It's only sort of Congress in later editing that document that gets added in. But look, I'll grant it to you. Fine, the Declaration of Independence has a creator. It's still not Christian, by the way. And of course, if a Christian writes the creator, they're probably talking about the Christian creator. But the whole point of America and the reason that the founders were so genius is because they recognized that not everybody living in the country and not everybody who goes on to rule the country are going to share their political opinions. And so they were very clear about what kind of political views and what kind of political tests somebody must pass and which ones must not be relevant. And we know that religious belief is not one of those, especially when we look at the Constitution and find that the only times religion is mentioned is twice. Firstly...
Thank you. Yes, this is kind of what I was saying a minute ago, is that even if when it says like the creator, that could mean any god. That could just be, that's just like vaguely religious.
In saying that no religious test, that there should be no religious test to any public office in the United States. And secondly, in the later added Bill of Rights, protecting the free exercise of religion. And so I suppose what I'm asking is, when we look at the actual legal texts here, I understand the idea that referring to a creator in a Declaration of Independence, maybe Congress had the Christian God in mind. Maybe they didn't. I mean, some of these founders were, as you say. I mean, you said it was a hodgepodge. That's putting it lightly. Thomas Jefferson famously cut out all references to the divinity of Christ from his Gospels. Like, where are we getting this specifically Christian idea at the founding of America from, and not just some kind of vague deism that may have even only been referenced in the first place in a rhetorical attempt to inspire people to revolution?
Well, I totally grant that Thomas Jefferson had some problems. I'm not denying it. I mean, Thomas Jefferson was one of, if not the most liberal of the founding fathers. And then you mentioned Thomas Paine, who I wouldn't count really as a founding father, but he did write the pamphlet that kicked off a lot of revolutionary sentiment.
Wikipedia would disagree with you there.
Listen, you limeys, I don't know what you're doing to our founding fathers, but that man I consider separate. But he's obviously extremely important, and he was quite radical. You know, if we're picking our favorite Brits who were in favor of America in one way or the other, I would have to side with the great Edmund Burke, who took a great deal of issue with Thomas Paine. But perhaps we can get to him a little bit later. When it comes to the Declaration, we don't need to wonder too much about what these guys thought about the Creator, because we do have some of their writings, and John Adams, who served in the Continental Congress.
Yeah, but even if you can conclusively prove that they were talking about God or the Christian God, that again does not mean that America was designed to be legally a Christian nation. This to me sounds like they're arguing over nothingness.
And was the second president and was a political foe of Thomas Jefferson, said, and the man, by the way, was not particularly orthodox in his Christianity, but he said that we all agreed that the general principles for the revolution on which we could achieve national independence would be the general principles of Christianity. So he speaks about Christianity broadly. He's speaking on behalf of his fellows in the Continental Congress and the Founding Fathers. Even as you say, if Jefferson didn't, he was a little reluctant to include the word Creator. He ultimately acquiesced, and it's a document not just of single authorship by Jefferson, but it's a statement by this incipient country. So you see that there, but you see it elsewhere also. You see it in the Federalist Papers. Again, not exactly reading like an encyclical or a papal bull, but the Federalist Papers, specifically James Madison, do cite God directly by name. And then you have the Constitution. You mentioned the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights, which says that there will be the free exercise of religion. There will be no establishment of a church. This is quite misunderstood in modern day, because some people take this to mean that either there can be no church established anywhere in the United States, or they would go even further and say that the country would be secular. It'd be absent from religion, and this would have been completely unheard of to the framers of the Constitution. In fact, the chief political reason for the refusal to establish a church at the national level is that there already were churches established at the state level. There were a number of them, and they persisted for decades after the ratification of the Constitution. So no one would have understood that to be unconstitutional or contrary to the spirit of the new nation. If so, the Constitution never would have been ratified. Now, later on, again, bringing Lincoln back into it, in the middle of the 19th century, you get, or later 19th century, you get the 14th Amendment, which then incorporates the Bill of Rights to the states and probably precludes any chance that we would have of having state establishments ever again. But now we're fast forwarding over 150 years, at least at the beginning of the country. It was not understood as having a firm separation of church and state, no matter what Thomas Jefferson might have longed for in a private letter.
Yes, well, of course, that's often referred to, and I know we must be careful not to conflate the, let's say, private interpretations of the founders of what the Constitution said and what the Constitution either actually literally says or what it should perhaps be understood to say. I mean, the Establishment Clause doesn't just, it seems to me, preclude the ability to have an established church. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. It seems much more broad than this, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It seems to be a protection both of private religious belief and also, or I should say, both a
Exactly.
protection.
I'm glad he brought that up. That's like one of the first parts in the Constitution.
Of private religious belief, but also a preclusion of the government to legislate in any way that respects an establishment of religion, not just establishing some state church.
The key here, though, is the Congress part. Congress shall make no law, because it's very easy to look back with the current mode of jurisprudence and constitutional law and impose that on the Continental Congress, or I'm sorry, on the Constitutional Convention. But that was just not what the phrase meant at that time, or for many decades afterward. Congress could make no law doing those things because the states could do that, and the states did that, and the states had plenty of religious laws. We had blasphemy laws on the books in the United States very, very recently, and the churches did have established.
Wait, you're just saying that. They're like, we're saying that because they already have the state churches. No, I'm pretty sure it's because the founding fathers literally came to America again to escape religious persecution. This is like the most basic shit he's getting wrong.